All right, everybody's doing one of these this week, so why fight it? Here in celebration of the long awaited release of No Time to Die are my 5 favourite James Bond films. Now, these are not the 5 best James Bond films. These are not necessarily even the ones I consider to be the best James Bond films. They're just my favourite ones, for whatever reason. Ones I have some kind of personal association with. I also appear, quite by chance, to have picked one film from the canons of each of the 5 primary James Bonds, the recurring James Bonds, if you will. No disrespect to George Lazenby. I actually think George Lazenby was pretty good. I'm just not a fan of that one film he's in. So let's start off with probably the most controversial choice on the list, 1997's Tomorrow Never Dies. Now, the general consensus of opinion with regard to the 4 Pierce Brosnan James Bond movies is that they start good and get progressively worse. GoldenEye is great, Tomorrow Never Dies is a bit of a mess, The World Is Not Enough is garbled and boring, and Die Another Day is just plain silly. Now, while I broadly concur with this, I can't help but like Tomorrow Never Dies, and I appear to be in a bit of a minority on this one. This, I think, might be a case of something which afflicts fandom, which is the curse of knowing too much about the production of a movie. You see, Tomorrow Never Dies had a notoriously troubled production. It was being constantly rewritten on the set. The cast didn't get along with each other. The director didn't get along with the cast. And as such, it's acquired a reputation for being a bit of a mess. But here's the thing. I don't think that really shows on screen. 10 years later, similarly, Quantum of Solace had an incredibly troubled production, and in that case, I think you can tell. But with Tomorrow Never Dies, I don't think there's really that much evidence of the behind-the-scenes turmoil on the screen. And this is a lot of things I like about this movie. I like the fact that the bad guy is basically Rupert Murdoch. I like the fact that he has a proper old-school James Bond villain plan on the go, trying to turn 2 powers against each other to start a war to profit himself. I like Michelle Yeoh kicking ass, and I particularly like the music. Now, the big mark against GoldenEye in a lot of Bond fans' eyes, and indeed mine, is the music. For some reason, they went with Eric Serra, Luc Besson's mate, and Eric Serra's music has been described as sounding like a steel dustbin falling down stone steps, and it kind of does. It's all sort of percussion and synth-based, and it really doesn't sound very James Bondy. Tomorrow Never Dies is David Arnold's first James Bond score. He'd been angling for the gig for a long time, and you can tell how pleased he is to finally being given a real Bond movie to work with, and he goes full-on proper John Barry James Bond score. He even wrote a brilliant theme song, which unfortunately they didn't use in favour of the terrible Sheryl Crow one, but it's over the end titles. It's retitled Surrender, and it's sung by the great K.D. Lang. So yeah, probably not the best of the Pierce Brosnan Bond movies, but it's the one I like best. Okay, next up we have 1987's The Living Daylights. I was a huge fan of this film when it came out. I was 17, I went to see it at the pictures a bunch of times with my mates, and the main feeling that one got watching The Living Daylights was this immense sense of relief that it wasn't Roger Moore anymore. No disrespect to Roger. Roger was great, by all accounts a lovely guy. I think that comes across in the way he plays James Bond. Roger's James Bond is the only James Bond you'd ever actually want to meet, let's face it. But by View to a Kill, he just looks like your dad. And also, it's fairly obvious that it's only actually Roger for about 60% of the time. It's stunt doubles when he does anything other than stand up or sit down. So, yeah, View to a Kill is actually kind of let down by the fact that Roger Moore just looks completely past it. It was great having a young, vigorous James Bond, and I reckon Timothy Dalton was a great choice. I think Timothy Dalton very much paved the way for Daniel Craig's James Bond. Pierce Brosnan was more of a kind of return to smirky Roger Moore James Bond, but that kind of inner turmoil and realness that Craig tries to bring to the part was very much pioneered, I think, by Timothy Dalton. It's not a perfect movie. No matter how many times you see it, it's almost impossible to figure out what the bad guy's plan actually is. It's something to do with heroin and diamonds, and nobody really knows. Geopolitically, it hasn't aged that well either. Like Rambo 3, which came out the following year, the third act is set in Russian-occupied Afghanistan, and the good guys are the Mujahideen, who basically turned into the Taliban. But there's so much to love about it. It's got John Barry's last score, including some hilarious kind of clockwork 1980s drum machine stuff. It's got some of the best action sequences in the whole franchise, particularly the bits involving Andrzej Wisniewski as Necros, the unstoppable hitman. This is, of course, one of two 80s classics in which Andrzej Wisniewski stars, the other one, of course, being Bananarama's Video for Venus. But yeah, there's a scene where he single-handedly takes on an entire MI6 station in this stately house. And the eventual showdown between Necros and James Bond, where they're having a scrap on a cargo net that's hanging out of the back of a transport plane, is the only time I was ever in the movies watching a Bond movie and the audience actually gasped. Next up, we have 1964's Goldfinger. Right, it is hard to discuss the Sean Connery Bond movies without touching upon the fact that their sexual politics is basically appalling. Cary Fukunaga, who's directed the new one, kind of got into a bit of trouble with the press about a week ago for pointing out that Sean Connery's James Bond is basically a rapist. But he was right, he kind of is. Now, Roger and Pierce's James Bond shag around a lot, but there's never any implication that they shag anybody who would rather they didn't. Whereas the same can really not be said for Sean Connery's James Bond. And there is one scene in Goldfinger which, well, it's pretty hard to watch now, but one can't help but wonder how easy it was to watch when it came out. Have times really changed that much? Yeah, I suppose they have. And it's really only the presence of this scene which stops me ranking Goldfinger as possibly the best James Bond film of all time. Because it's kind of the James Bond film which invents the James Bond film. It's the third in the series. The first one, Dr. No, was a kind of fairly glossy spy movie with some exotic locales and some interesting science fiction shit going on. The second one, From Russia with Love, is a pretty glossy but fairly standard Cold War chase movie. The Bond film, as we know it, really starts with Goldfinger. You know, the geopolitical stuff is kept in the background in favour of the machinations of this cartoon supervillain. And so many of the elements which have become beloved of the franchise really start here. You have the bad guys' indestructible henchmen. You have the first and still best of the Bondmobiles, the Aston Martin DB5, possibly the single most beautiful car ever produced. It's also one of the few times they take a Fleming plot and change it for the better. In the book, Goldfinger genuinely is going to try and get all the gold out of Fort Knox, which, as Bond points out in the movie, is completely impractical. In the movie, Goldfinger's scheme is altogether cleverer and way more cinematic. Goldfinger, yeah, that's really where it all starts. It's just a shame about the bit in the barn. Okay, coming in at number 2, we have 1977, a lot of sevens in this, The Spy Who Loved Me. Now, if Goldfinger is the James Bond movie which establishes James Bond movies as a genre in their own right, then the most James Bond movie is The Spy Who Loved Me. All those things that Goldfinger sets up that then become an integral part of the franchise, they all reach their apotheosis with The Spy Who Loved Me. The Bondmobile turns into a submarine. The indestructible henchman is 7'4" of Richard Keel with steel teeth. The bad guy's plan is so ostentatious, it actually involved building a whole new wing onto Pinewood Studios just so they could film the finale. It's also perhaps the most 1970s Bond movie. It's the first Bond movie of the 70s that really felt like an event picture. Bond was kind of going around in circles a bit for the first bit of the 70s, but with Spy Who Loved Me, it really hits kind of blockbuster level. It's also the first one I went to see at the Pictures, and I think your first Bond movie at the Pictures is always going to stay with you. It's also got one of the best theme tunes, and it's got the Union Jack parachute. So if James Bond movies are a genre in themselves, distinct from just spy movies or action thrillers, then the ultimate James Bond movie was The Spy Who Loved Me. And number 1, we have 2006's Casino Royale, as opposed to 1967's Casino Royale. If you haven't seen that, I envy you. 2006's Casino Royale just doesn't put a foot wrong, as far as I'm concerned. It's not so much that anything about it is spectacularly brilliant, it just gets everything right. The casting of Craig was completely audacious, and it absolutely comes off. You've entirely forgotten about poor old Pierce Brosnan by the end of the opening titles. Much as The Living Daylights did, it very skillfully incorporates the entire plot of Fleming's essentially novella into the middle of the movie and then constructs an entire plot around it. But the whole book is in there, including the bit we thought they'd never have the balls to do. The Bond girl is Eva Green, so you can absolutely believe that he falls in love with her and is completely devastated by the end. And it gave the world Mads Mikkelsen. How can you not love a film which introduces the wider world of Mads Mikkelsen? So there you go. Those are my 5 favourite Bond movies. Why don't you tell me what your 5 favourite Bond movies are in the comments? And while you're down there, click on the like button and click on the subscribe button. Who knows, if No Time to Die is every bit as good as I want it to be, I might even have revised this list by this time next week.
This video was made possible by the supporters of my Patreon project, who help me make fun things while receiving great perks and rewards. If you enjoyed it, why not follow the link and join us?